Okay, so why don't we get started? Let me just say good morning again and welcome to today's Proposition HH Forum, hosted by our local elected officials, Senator Joann Ginal, Representative Kathy Kipp, and Representative Andrew Boesenecker. The purpose of today's forum is to have a community conversation about Colorado Proposition HH, the property tax changes and revenue change measure, which is to be voted on in November. To learn more about Proposition HH, we are honored to have as our guest presenter Senator Chris Hansen from Senate District 31. Senator Hansen has served in the Colorado State Senate since 2020, and prior to that, he served in the Colorado House of Representatives from 2017 to 2020. Senator Hansen was one of the sponsors of Senate Bill 23-303, which served to refer Proposition HH to the November ballot. My name is Beth Jager, and I'm going to be your moderator for the next 60 minutes. After Senator Hansen's presentation, we will have a question and answer session, and you'll be able to ask your questions in one of two ways. The first way is that you can click on the chat icon and type your question in, or if you prefer to ask your question live, then click on the raised hand function. Drake and I will see your virtual hand being raised. We will unmute you. We will ask you to introduce yourself. And then after your question or comment is responded to, we will put you back on mute so we can minimize any kind of background noise. I do have one request, and that is that we know that there are many diverse opinions and concerns about Prop HH. So to keep this a very productive conversation, we would like for you to ask your questions and offer your comments in a respectful manner. So with that, it is now my honor to introduce Senator Hansen. Senator?
Yeah, Beth, thank you. Good morning. And to my colleagues from Larimer County, great to see everybody this morning. Really happy to join you. As Beth mentioned, I am one of the sponsors of Proposition HH and have been working hard on the campaign to get the information in front of voters so everybody can make a great decision about this important ballot measure. What I plan to do today is I've got a few PowerPoint slides that will just give an overview of Proposition HH, give you some of the background and the detail, and then look forward to the discussion and Q&A later in our time together. So with that, let me share my screen and we'll get going on the introduction to Proposition HH. And just to double check, Beth, is that coming through all right?
Yeah, that's great, Senator.
All right, terrific. Well, let me first just walk through kind of what is inside of HH, and there we go. Make sure I can advance the slides. So what is Proposition HH? Well, it is fundamentally a property tax relief, but property tax relief that makes sure that we don't have reduction in funding for things like schools, libraries, fire districts, water districts, hospital districts, all of the important local services that we depend on that rely on property tax. So it's really trying to deliver very large amount of property tax relief, but do it in a way where we don't undercut the funding streams for these important local services. Let's do a little bit of history. How did we get here? Well, in 1982, I was 7 years old that day. That year, the Gallagher Amendment was passed by the voters of Colorado. That was in the Constitution for almost 40 years. And that amendment made a lot of sense in 1982, but over time, there were some really big changes in the property tax situation in Colorado. And so myself, along with many of my colleagues, voted to put the Gallagher Amendment repeal onto the ballot in 2020 to try to create more balance in our property tax system. The Gallagher Amendment was resulting in escalating property taxes on the non-residential side and relatively or very low property taxes on the residential side. The voters of Colorado agreed, and by about 58 to 42 margin, voted to take Gallagher Amendment out of the Constitution. We then, along with my colleagues, sponsored Senate Bill 293 and 238 in 2021 and 2022 that were 2-year property tax relief measures. And a lot of the reason that we did short term was because of the uncertainty coming out of the COVID pandemic and what that was going to do to property markets and property taxes in the state. But we did pass those legislatively in 21 and 22. And we now come to you in 2023 with a long-term, stable approach to property tax relief. And that's really what we're talking about with HH. So Prop HH for dummies, cut property taxes, but backfill the important services that rely on property taxes from the state surplus that results from the Tabor Constitutional Amendment. That's really the heart and soul of what we're doing in HH. But let me go into some of the details, make sure people understand what it means for them and what it means for their community. First of all, it's property tax relief for every category of property, from residential to agriculture to commercial, small businesses. Every type of property is included in the property tax relief. Depending on the year, it's between $1 and $1.6 billion of property tax relief for 10 years. So more than $10 billion, closer to $11 billion of property tax relief over this 10-year package that we have in front of voters. It also provides very significant property tax relief for seniors and renters. And I'm going to get into some of the details on that in just a second. And I think also importantly, it creates a requirement that local jurisdictions are looking at their property tax retention, regardless of what inflation is, regardless of where the economy is. We are now asking local districts to look at that, and they have to take an affirmative decision if they're going to keep property tax revenue over the rate of inflation. So we think it sets up the right type of conversation from the state all the way down to the local level to make sure we're managing property taxes over time. What does it mean for homeowners? Probably most important for everybody on the call. Many of us own homes, some of us are renters, but for homeowners in the state, we're seeing on the Front Range in particular, about a 40% increase in the assessed value of properties. So HH, if it passes, reduces the assessment rate for all residential homes, and importantly, makes sure that lower income or middle income families are getting significant relief out of this package. So the first $50,000 of home value in 2023, the first $40,000 of home value from 2024 to 2032 is going to be excluded from the property tax calculation. So that's a big initial benefit for your primary residence. For the average homeowner, this means about $1,000 of property tax savings over the first 2 years of the package, and about $3,200 over the first 5 years of the package. So pretty significant relief, particularly in light of the big assessment changes that we're seeing. I'm sure that all the homeowners on the call, you've gotten that letter in the mail from the Larimer County assessor and talking about how big the changes have been, so you know exactly what I'm referring to. Let's give some examples, though. What does this mean numerically? And you can kind of find the approximate value of your property on this particular chart and kind of see what that looks like. Again, we've made sure that the lower value properties that the lower income families, middle income families own have an extra amount of property tax relief. That's that first $50,000 exemption that I talked about. But you can see, even if you're a very wealthy homeowner, very significant property tax relief here based on kind of statewide averages. So this is going to be a little bit higher in the Front Range than it is maybe out on the plains, but this gives you a good sense of what this is going to look like over the assessment cycle in 23-24. We do those in 2-year cycles in Colorado. What does this mean for seniors? Well, I think this is one of the most attractive parts of Proposition HH. For seniors, not only do they get that initial exemption, but we are finally going to solve the portability problem for the homestead exemption. So many of you may take advantage of the senior homestead exemption. That is a great benefit for fixed income seniors in the state. The problem is, once you move, or if you have to downsize, or you need to change properties because you need to make a change because of medical reasons or whatever it might be, you lose that senior homestead exemption under the current constitutional framework that we have. Prop HH fixes that in a permanent way. And it says that if you qualify for the senior homestead exemption, you can take it with you for the rest of your life. And that is a huge, I think, upside of Proposition HH. It means for the average senior homeowner, they're going to save $1,000 just like everybody else. But if you need that portability, it actually doubles your savings. So this, to me, is a really attractive feature of what we're doing in HH. For renters, there's really 2 different mechanisms that we have in HH. There's indirect and direct. On the direct side, we're going to basically double the amount of statewide money that we have for rental assistance. $20 million will be added to that fund under Proposition HH. And then, of course, if property taxes are coming down, that means less pressure on rental rates around the state. In some cases, tenants, especially for small businesses, have triple net leases, and that property tax is just a direct pass-through. So clearly, that's going to be a direct benefit for renters that have those types of leases. If you have an indirect property tax in your rent, of course, less pressure on the landlord means less pressure on higher rents. And we're actually starting to see rents come down in the Front Range now as supply is starting to catch up with demand. So we think this creates a really positive dynamic for renters, and it's going to help to lower costs for everybody in the property market. For businesses, if you've got a small business, again, we've got that initial exemption of $30,000 for small businesses. This is going to help tremendously with your property tax rates. And it's about 11% decrease if Prop HH passes for small businesses. It's the first commercial property tax cut in state in over 45 years. This is a big deal, I think, for commercial properties. And keep in mind that commercial property tax rates in Colorado are about the middle of the pack nationally. We're about 20th right now. If HH passes, this will take us just down to 25 or 26 on the table. On the residential side, we're 49th in the country. So we have relatively low property taxes, some of the lowest, if not the lowest in the country, depending on where you live. So we really feel like HH is a responsible way to handle this situation. All right, but what does it mean for schools? I know a lot of people on this call care deeply about school funding. Well, this to me is really the other big upside of Proposition HH is not only we're providing significant property tax relief, but we're making sure there's backfill for the schools in particular. 100% backfill for all the districts in the state. And we're going to ask the voters to retain a portion of the Tabor surplus that we're currently experiencing in the state. What does that look like? So let's talk about Tabor. Well, here's the current outlook. It looks like we're going to have refunds for the next several years. I'm sure folks are familiar with the checks that we sent from the state for the 21-22 tax year. We're going to be doing something very similar in 22-23. And it's the forecast right now is showing that we're going to have maintain some Tabor surplus, although at a lower level than the last couple of years as we look out into the future. So that's the expectation for the next few years. But what are we asking for voters to do in HH? Well, we're asking to change the revenue retention formula by 1%. Right now, it's population plus inflation. And if HH passes, it will be population plus inflation plus 1%. So to give you a numerical example, this year inflation is going to be about 3.5%. And the population growth in the state, typically about 0.5% this year. So that adds up to 4. Add 1% to that, we're asking for a 5% change to the Tabor revenue retention. And what does that look like going into the future? Now, this is the analysis from the nonpartisan legislative staff. This is not from the campaign. This is what's in your blue book. So I just want to point that out. Everyone received this in the mail recently or will be arriving the next day or two. This is what it looks like. The Ref C cap, which the voters approved in 2005, you can see the size of that. That was a significant change to the Tabor revenue retention. Here we're talking about a 1% change, and you can see what that looks like over what we did in 2005. So this, I think, is a really balanced way to do this. It's a relatively minor change to what's going on with Tabor as compared to what we did in Ref C. And you can see on this chart what that's going to look like over the next 10 years, which is essentially the length of the package that's being put in front of the voters. So that's the Tabor revenue piece. I'm sure there might be other questions about that, but I want to give everyone a clear picture of what that actually looks like for the average taxpayer. Now, if you're a filer who is filing less than $100,000 a year, which is the vast majority of Colorado taxpayers, your Tabor refunds actually increase in 2023. So don't believe some of the things you're hearing on TV. The Tabor refunds are not going away, but we are going to be asking for that additional retention so we can cover the backfill mechanism. Really, the chart here makes it very clear for the most of the filers in the state who are below $250,000, you're actually going to see very minor changes or positive changes on the Tabor side. And the decrease that you're getting on the property tax side, of course, more than makes up for this for 97% or so of all Colorado taxpayers. So I think that's a really attractive part of what we're doing in HH. This is also a fork in the road. Let's be very clear about the decision that we're making. Do we accept Proposition HH and have balanced reform, balanced relief that doesn't hurt our local schools, or do we go down the track that California did with Proposition 13? There's a group of donors in the state who are trying to get Initiative 50 onto the ballot right now. They're collecting signatures, probably at your local grocery store, to try to put in a hard cap on property tax changes that would absolutely decimate school funding in the state. And so I want to be really clear about the choices that we're talking about here when we think about what we're going to do to replace Gallagher. Prop HH, balance relief, or do we go down the track of really hurting our schools and our local fire districts? And I think that's what's on the ballot with Initiative 50. So to wrap up my prepared remarks, broad coalition that's supporting this, the governor, former governor, county commissioners from around the state, the teachers union, Colorado Education Association, Colorado Concern, one of the big business groups in the state, is a strong supporter of Prop HH. So we have got a really broad coalition of folks from across the political spectrum that are supporting this, and you can see some of the other groups that have been heavily involved. So that's the end of my prepared remarks, and really looking forward to having a chance to answer any questions that might be there about Prop HH. Thanks for having me, Beth.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. I now want to open it up to our participants and have them ask their questions or offer their comments. And remember, you can do that through the chat function. You can type it in there, or you can raise your virtual hand using the raised hand function on the bottom of your screen. So I'm going to pause there and wait for our first question today.
Looks like we have one in the chat, Beth.
Thank you. Thank you, Drake. Senator, this is from Gabriel Engler, and she would like you to explain home rule city and school district exclusions.
Yeah, it's not exclusions, it's actually inclusions. All of the school districts in the state, all 174 of them, I think, Kathy will know that number off the top of her head, will all have 100% backfill. So there's no exclusions there for school districts. For the other types of districts, like fire districts, library districts, etc., we've basically set it up so there's 100% backfill for lower growth districts. For high property growth districts, where the assessed value is going to grow significantly in the future, we start to reduce that state backfill over time because there's more assessed growth there to support those local services. So really trying to make sure the schools are 100% taken care of. And then for the high value and high growth areas, that will be taken care of through local mill levy decisions. And we'll leave that to the county commissions or to the local fire districts in the future.
Thank you. Diane Meyer is asking, which groups are currently opposing this proposition? Are they rallying voters against Proposition HH?
There is a campaign that is asking for no vote on HH. I know some of their donors. It's being led by Michael Fields, and the Americans for Prosperity group are the kind of the anchor tenants there. There are other groups involved, but yeah, I'll leave it to folks to get in touch with that campaign if they want more details. Of course, their donors are online, just like any other political campaign.
Thank you. Gabriel Engler has a follow-up comment. The bill states home rule city exclusions for property tax reduction. Can you comment on that, Senator?
Yeah, we're not asking, or there's nothing in here that changes the mill levy decisions at the local government level. So your local city council, your local county commission, that is still very much in their hands. So I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to in the bill about exclusions.
Margaret Long is asking any backfill for counties.
Yes, absolutely. So they get the same, all of those local districts get the same mechanism. It's basically set up so that if there's low growth in the future, that they're going to get 100% backfill. If there's very high growth in the future, we start to reduce that state backfill because the local share will take that over. But yeah, county governments, city governments, special districts, they're all included in the backfill mechanism.
Thank you. Carrie Brookman is asking, will the senior exemption be transferable for owners who have ever qualified, such as those who had exemption and moved to a new home in 2017 who won't normally qualify until 2027?
Yeah, as soon as you qualify, you'll have portability if HH passes. So I don't know everything about that situation that you described, but if you've qualified, you will immediately have it under HH, and it will be portable for the rest of your life.
Gabriel Engler is back with another comment, which is great. She wants to know, why can this be extended beyond 10 years without a vote?
Yeah, so that's HH is a package of property tax relief and revenue retention. It's set up for a 10-year renewal period. So the future legislature will take a look at this, and if things are working well, it could be renewed. If things need adjustment, they can make adjustment, but you can't change the basic formula between the property tax relief and the revenue retention. So you can't have one without the other. That's what the voters are voting on in HH. And so it can be renewed past that, but that formula has to remain in place.
Thank you. Diane Meyer has a question. Is there any social media we can follow where we can share this information to others?
Yeah, absolutely. The Yes on HH campaign has Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and all the things. And feel free to use those posts and share them with your neighbors and friends. Also happy to share these slides if anybody wants me to email them to them or distribute the slides that I just used. Happy to share those too.
Thank you. Any other questions? Remember, through the chat, or you can raise your hand if you wish to ask your question live. Leslie Noon, what happens if there is no Tabor surplus, Senator?
Yeah, so if there's no Tabor surplus in the future, which historically that has been the case about 80% of the time, the surpluses we have right now are somewhat unique. If there's no surplus in the future, we still have this commitment to the schools and to the districts that the state will be responsible for. But there obviously wouldn't be any Tabor refunds if there's no surplus. So that's the thing that would change for the citizens. But on the budget side, these are commitments that we're making directly to K-12.
Thank you. Brian Blakely is commenting and asking, last week at the listening session, we got a HO, which I assume is homeowner, that said Coloradoans over 65 and own their home for 10 years are eligible for an assessed value reduction of $150,000. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, I mean, under HH, that's exactly right. So the current senior homestead exemption basically says you've got to be in your home for 10 years and you got to stay there. And if you move, you lose it. That's the big weakness of the current homestead exemption. If HH passes, that will then be portable. So the amount of benefit that is going to folks now who are staying in their properties is going to be available for folks even if they move. So that's exactly right. It results in an extra $1,000 a year in less property tax. And that essentially equates to what you just described, which is about $150,000 of value that's exempt.
Thank you. Bernice Lieberman is asking that you explain how this affects renters.
Yeah, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, there's really two mechanisms here for renters. They're direct and indirect mechanisms. On the direct side, if you have a triple net lease, which many small businesses and some residential renters have, where the property tax is essentially a line item on your lease payment, this is a direct set of relief because, of course, if property taxes get reduced, then your total rent payment goes down. The other direct mechanism is we're going to add $20 million to the rental relief fund that is used across the state for renters who need assistance. So that's, of course, a direct mechanism. On the indirect side, let's say you're renting from a private owner of a house or a private owner of an apartment, and it's not a triple net lease. If that owner's payment is reduced, that means there's less pressure to recover that in rent. Obviously, there's lots of market forces that are also at play in setting the final rent policy or maintenance needs of a property, right? There's lots of things going on inside of leases, but we are, it's very clear that if property tax goes down, there's less pressure on that lease payment for that landlord. So there's really kind of a direct and indirect mechanisms depending on what kind of lease you have.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Senator, is there a part of your presentation that you would wish to expand on at all?
Well, I was really trying to cover the highlights of what we've got in front of voters. I definitely recommend folks take a look at the Blue Book if they want to see any more of the financial analysis that the state economists have done. But yeah, I just would highlight, I think we've carefully negotiated this package to try to make sure we weren't going to hurt school districts, but also provide significant relief for homeowners and property owners across the state. And that's the basic package, and it'll certainly detail that I wanted to cover as much as I could this morning. Lots of detail here, and everybody's circumstance is a little bit different, so take the time to dig into it. I will say there is a calculator on the Blue Book website, so if you want to go in and go to the state legislative website, you could put in some information about the value of your home that you received from the assessor and your zip code, and it will tell you exactly pre and post HH. So if folks want to do that calculation, we've got an online tool that's available that anybody can use.
Okay, great. Thank you for adding those comments, because now we have a bunch more questions coming in.
Okay.
And Senator Ginal, you also have your hand raised, so let me go to you. Can you unmute yourself, Senator?
Yes, thanks, Beth. And thanks, Senator Hansen. I think what I'll do is I will wait till the end of the questions before I make some comments, if that's okay.
Sure. Let me go back to the chat then. Senator Hansen, what is the impact on the state budget?
Well, if Prop HH passes, the state budget, I believe, will be improved because we will have the ability to retain that additional revenue that we talked about, the 1% change. It's about $167 million next year, for example. That's what the calculation from our budget staff is telling us. And a big chunk of that, of course, is going to go directly back for the backfill mechanism, back to the schools and the counties and the fire districts, et cetera. But the good news is that means that it takes less pressure off of the state general fund to do even larger payments to K-12. And so, I think on net, this is going to really help us improve our budget situation in the long term. And I've always kind of, I used to serve on the Joint Budget Committee. I still serve on Senate Appropriations. And if you look at the big picture, we're really trying to have a system where it's kind of a three-legged stool. The main methods of taxation in Colorado are property tax, sales tax, and income tax. And if one of the things we tried to make sure we maintained in Prop HH is that we have balance between those different things, because of course property taxes are disproportionately going to K-12 and support our schools, along with the other important local services. And we want to make sure we're not getting unbalanced. And I think that's the cautionary tale of what we see happening in California when they adopted Prop 13, which is essentially what the groups opposing HH are trying to put on the ballot for 2024. So we don't want to make that mistake. California already showed us that doesn't work, and we need to maintain balance between those three legs of the stool.
Thank you. Senator, I'm going to go back to Brian Blakely's question, because I thought HO stood for homeowner. It stands for handout. So he got a handout at the listening session last week. This is in regard to Coloradoans over 65, own their home for 10 years, are eligible for an assessment value reduction of $150,000. He now wants to know, does one who qualifies have to apply for the $150,000 reduction?
Yes. Yeah, you have to claim that exemption. Yeah, like almost all tax exemptions, you have to claim it. And that would be the case whether or not HH passes. The good news, though, is if HH passes, you now have portability. And if you move or you need to downsize or get rid of stairs, like just happened to my dad, he was having trouble handling lots of stairs, so they moved to a one level living situation. You can take it with you, and that's the big change.
Thank you. Diane Meyer wants to know, how confident are you that this will pass in November?
Well, yeah, working hard on the campaign. Our latest polling has us in the lead. And I'm feeling, very confident that if we get this information out in front of voters, that they're going to see the merits of the proposal and the benefit of reducing their property taxes. And yeah, feeling very, very confident that we can pass this in November.
Okay. Senator Ginal, do you have a comment?
Beth,
think
like I said, I just want to keep my hand up until
Okay.
the other questions
right.
are in.
Oh, sorry. I'll go back to you later on then. Thank you for clarifying that. Gabrielle Engler is asking, if HH fails, will there be new legislation for the senior homestead portability?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have a feeling that if we are in that situation, that the legislature will go back to the drawing board if the voters decide not to pass HH. Right now, I'm of course focused on passing HH, but we think there's a lot of great policy elements in this proposal, including the portability issue, and we may return to that in the future if HH doesn't pass.
Okay. Any other questions? Gabrielle is commenting here that she didn't realize that a percentage of property taxes go to the state. Sorry, don't like
They
HH
don't.
for the long term.
Yeah, property taxes do not go to the state at all. Property taxes are used to fund the schools, fire districts, hospital districts, county commissions, city governments, etc. The interaction with the state budget, though, is because the state has a commitment to K-12 for total program funding, and whatever the local share is not covering, the state then needs to come in and cover the rest. And so that's really why we're trying to maintain balance here, make sure that we have an adequate local share. And I think that's one of the big upsides of HH is that we deliver property tax relief. But unlike the proposal from the other side, it doesn't gut property tax funding over time and destroy school budgets.
Thank you. Rep. Kip is asking, can you explain school funding and the backfill?
Sure, that's another hour-long Zoom all by itself, but I will try to give the abbreviated version. School funding, as I said, the foundation for school funding is local property tax. So if you look carefully on your property tax bill, in Denver, about 68% of my property tax goes to Denver Public School. That forms the majority of their budget, or I should say, almost the majority of their budget. It's a little under, actually, and that's true across the state. One of the downsides of Gallagher is that it was pushing local share lower and lower, and so that was kind of undercutting our ability to fund K-12. And I think, again, one of the upsides here is that we're putting that on a positive trajectory for education funding. Basically the state then decides what is going to be the per pupil funding level, and that creates the total program fund mark that has to be hit in every district based on local share plus state share. So just think of it as those two main elements. Again, local share is property tax, state share is general fund. General fund comes from income tax and sales tax at the state level. Every year, the Joint Budget Committee puts together a proposal along with the rest of the legislature. We pass that, the governor signs it, and that becomes the total program spending for K-12. But it really has those two main elements, property tax and state general fund. And that's how we develop the annual budget for schools.
So with those comments, I think this came in while you were speaking, Senator. Gabrielle had heard that the school funding amount won't change either way, but it sounds like it will.
Well, yeah, I think school funding amount, of course, there's the backfill mechanism, which is 100% backfill. So it's technically right to say, hey, next year, the total amount that's going to come in for K-12 is going to be stable. And that was one of our aims with Prop HH, is that you would have stability there that school districts could count on. I think the good news is in the future, if we have a stronger local share, that gives us a pathway for long-term total increases to K-12 across the state. So don't want to make commitments of a future legislature, but I think it opens up the possibility that has been completely missing for the last 40 years with Gallagher and the last 30 years with Tabor, which is essentially shrinking our K-12 budget year over year after you adjust for inflation and the needs of the local districts. So that has been a really negative dynamic. I think after HH passes, we'll be in a positive situation when it comes to K-12 funding in particular. But don't forget, the state is also spending significant resources on pre-K as well as higher ed. And both of those, I think, will be in a stronger budget position after HH passes.
Thank you. Brian is again commenting that he hopes HH passes, but can you clarify when it would take effect if it does pass?
Yeah, almost immediately. It would go into effect. And so for the 23-24 property tax payments, you would see those reductions immediately. And so, right now, folks' tax payments, their escrow payments, right? For those of us that have mortgages, it just gets lumped into your escrow payment. Those are set to increase pretty significantly in 2023 if HH doesn't pass. And so if it's accepted by the voters in November, would immediately go into effect and reduce your property tax liability in 2023.
Gabrielle is asking, why aren't we waiting to see how much more money is added with the higher property valuations?
Well, we've got those valuations. So just to kind of review that process, the state of Colorado does 2-year property valuation cycles. It goes from June of the even numbered year to June of the 2 years later. So in this case, the letters you got in the mail are a result of what was the change between June of 2020, the height of the pandemic, to June of 2022, the height of the property bubble. And that is kind of one of the reasons for this issue, why we had such high changes, big changes in valuation, is because that window, June of 20 to June of 22, tremendous change in that 2 years. We're actually now seeing values stabilize, or in some cases go back down as the property market has started to stabilize more. But that will not show up until we do the new valuation cycle from July of 2022 to June of 2024. That doesn't take effect until the 25 tax year. So there's always a lag factor there. And that's why we thought it was so urgent to get HH in front of the voters, so that we don't have these big changes, these big increases that would hit in the 23 tax year.
Thank you, Senator. Diane Meyer is commenting that she's concerned that this prop is too complicated to explain to our friends and neighbors quickly.
Well, that was my attempt with this slide presentation, is to really boil it down for everybody. You saw my kind of tongue-in-cheek, Prop HH for Dummies. You're probably all familiar with those books, the car maintenance for dummies and that kind of thing. Just make it very simple. But to give you the headline again, it's property tax relief for everybody while maintaining our local services and schools. That is the essence of Prop HH.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from our participants? Remember, you can type them in or raise your hand.
Beth, it looks like we missed one from Brian saying, so we need to wait until HH passes or takes effect before we apply. To whom do we apply? I assume that's for the senior homestead.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Jerry.
So Brian, I don't know your whole situation, but you can absolutely reach out to your county assessor. They have resources to help guide people when it comes to claiming the senior homestead exemption. If you already qualify, you should be able to get it right away. If you don't qualify, you'll need to wait till HH passes to then be part of that process as the assessors across the state implement it. But yeah, not knowing all of your situation, I would recommend reaching out to your county assessor.
Thank you, Senator. We do not have any other questions or comments coming in at this point. So, Senator Ginal, this might be a good time for your comment.
And thank you, Hansen.
Your volume is a little choppy, Senator.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you everyone that's on this call. Also, thank you, Senator Hansen, for presenting in support. I just want to let it know one side of the equation, and I have always done ballot initiative.
Senator, your audio is a little choppy again.
Okay, let's see what we can do about that. What I'm trying to hear me now.
That's better.
Okay, all I'm saying is that Senator Hansen is giving you one side. I want to make sure, and this is what I've tried to do, Chambers of Commerce of Fort Collins and of Loveland had a balanced discussion about a month ago in regards to the support and the opposition as to why HH, is good and what the other issues are about HH. And, you make the decision. That's what I've always, I know where I stand, but you're the one who has to go through the pros and the cons in order to make the right decision, but make sure you do your homework. And the reason why I say that is because this came out in the last week of session. We have 120 days of session. We had a land use bill that was coming out at the same time. This bill was 61 pages long. It was very hard. It's very difficult. One of the comments was, how to explain this to people quickly. It's not something you do explain quickly. There's a lot to learn about this bill or about this ballot initiative now. But everything in this bill or everything that you would vote for can be done legislatively. And maybe Senator Hansen will correct me on this, but I've run the portability for the Senior Homestead Exemption Act twice. And in my own Democratic committee, it's been voted down. And now I see it as a ballot initiative. So it can be done legislature. If Prop HH does not have the fourth.
We're losing your audio again, Senator. Senator, we lost your audio the last 10 seconds.
Where did you lose my audio?
Just about 10 seconds ago.
So any HH, the portability issue of HH can come back next session. As I mentioned, I brought it back. I have brought this forward twice and it's been voted down. But now I see it as a ballot initiative, which is rather interesting. The other point is that I don't believe, Hansen, that you had meant that you're going to see an increase in the next.
Senator, we're losing you again.
All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. What wasn't said, and maybe I missed it, was we were talking about a 1% change in the next few years. But that is compounded. So every year that this goes through, your 1% adds up. So 1 year it's 1%, the next year it'll go up 2%, 3%, up to 10%, because you're up to 2032. By that time, you don't have any TABOR refunds because it's just all gone. That's a concern of mine. And also renters is a one-time thing, basically. You don't pay property tax. With the 15 bills that we had come through on tenant landlord bills, which isn't going to help renters right now, but this minimal reduction in taxes isn't going to help renters because your rents are going to go up. And they say there's a $20 million per year direct help for renters. If I did my math correctly, there are over 40% of the state are renters, and give or take is about 3 million people, something like that. And it's about, if you took everybody evenly, it's about $10, maybe a little less per renter. But how are you going to figure out $20 million in rental assistance? How are you going to apply for that? Who's going to get it? Is it the first one that comes forward? Depending upon your amount that, or your income level, it's not even been decided. It's still up in the air. My concern is that $20 million is going to go really fast, because we've seen that with the COVID relief monies. $20 million is nothing. So renters beware. But everything that is brought forth in this proposition can be done legislatively. We can lower taxes. We don't have to take a ballot initiative on it. But and as far as the senior homestead exemption, yeah, it's $150 for the first year, and then it drops to $140. So it's not $150 here starting and on out. It drops, and it's not that significant when you factor in what you're really saving on the cost of homes. I mean, back when a home was affordable and wasn't, average home wasn't $600,000, when you could buy something for 70 or 100,000 or maybe even 200,000, which isn't very possible now, that was a good deal. But is it now? I just, in all due respect for Senator Hansen, I really respect you for all the work you've done on this, and I know you worked very hard on it. But please, look at both sides. Go to the Fort Collins Chamber of Commerce, go to the Loveland Chamber of Commerce. On their website, they have what Reps Kip and Boesenecker and myself, and I believe it's Senator Kirkmeyer, as well as Representative Lynch, and two folks from either side that were giving the pros and cons. And to me, that's how you make up your mind on, to support or to oppose. This sounds great. This sounds great, but there is another side to the story. So please, please, please look at what the other side is saying. The Blue Book, it's very complicated. This is not an easy subject to wrap your head around. And I just wanted to say that I appreciate everybody's being concerned about this, and you should be. Everything, if this doesn't pass, I guarantee you that we will spend more time on it next session. Right, Senator Hansen?
So,
Well, as I said,
thank you, Senator.
Yeah.
Senator, do you wish to comment?
well, I just want to point out, I guess, one statement that I think needs corrected, which is that HH could all be done legislatively. That's not true. Tabor, our Constitution, makes it very clear that if you want to adjust the revenue retention formula, you have to ask for voter permission. And that's a key part of this package, because we need the ability to retain that revenue to be able to cover K-12, to be able to cover the senior homestead exemption, to be able to cover the backfill for fire districts, et cetera. That is part of the package, and that cannot be done legislatively. That has to go to the ballot, and that's why we propose this as a ballot initiative and sent it to the voters.
Thank you, Senator.
May I say one other thing in
Sure,
response
and we
to
do have another question from one of our participants.
And Senator Hansen, it's my understanding that, in 2030, when this, or 2032, when this sunsets, that it'll be over 10%, and there won't be any Tabor money coming back, or possibly, who knows. But after that, the wording in this proposition, and if you read the bill that became this proposition, the voters don't get to vote on taxes in regards to this issue. It's the that makes those decisions from there on out.
Well, the legislature could renew the package. So that's the way it's set up. We've got the basic trade-off of lower property taxes with revenue retention. That cannot be changed. If it is, then it's void. But the legislature in 2032 can renew the current package.
But they can, it's the legislature from there on out that makes the decisions on an increase of property
Yeah,
tax.
well, no, not an increase. The property tax relief has to be continued under the package. But this is, it's similar to what we did in referendum C, which is we changed the revenue retention formula. I showed you the graph that, how Ref C was way bigger than what we're asking for here. And that, that has continued, right? You don't go back to the voters every single year. You ask for an adjustment and then that continues. And that's what we have in Prop HH, just like Ref C.
Thank you, senators, for your comments. We're coming to the top of the hour, and I just want to make sure that we get our participants' questions answered. This is from Lois Fink. She says, as someone who is a renter, if Prop HH passes and landlord's taxes go down, there is no guarantee the owner will lower my rent, especially if one is renting an apartment from a developer who is out of state. So what happens to those of us in that situation?
Yeah, as I mentioned in my remarks, there's really two main types of leases. There are ones where property tax is a direct pass-through to the renter. There's other leases like the one you're describing where it's indirect, and the landlord basically just incorporates property tax into the overall rents for their property. What we're seeing in the Front Range right now is that rents are actually starting to fall because of changes in market conditions. And we think that lowering property taxes for those owners will have a downward effect as part of that overall market movement. But you're absolutely right. It's indirect. The landlord, of course, is going to charge as much as they think the market will bear. But if there's less property tax embedded in their costs, that puts downward pressure on their calculations.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Boesenecker, you have a comment?
Thanks, Beth, and thanks, Senator Hansen, for making the time this morning to share with all of us up here in Larimer. Certainly do appreciate it. I just wanted to dovetail on Lois's question because it's an important one and one that I think we can draw a pretty direct line to here in our community. Sunflower, which is a mobile home park community just on the east side of I-25. I was out there a few weeks back. That's in Senate District 14. They're owners of the Sunflower Mobile Home Park, and it's an important differentiation here. Those folks own their homes, but they don't own the land it sits on. The owners of Sunflower Mobile Home Park, due to the increased valuation of property tax increases in our state and certainly here in Larimer, have shared a letter with residents that they are passing on every dime of that property tax increase to residents directly in the form of a lot rent increase. And I think this is a place where you can draw a pretty clear line between the impact on property tax increases in our state, the need for HH in order to provide even some indirect relief for renters or folks who rent the land that their home sits on, and the impact on older adults, folks with disabilities, seniors, veterans, et cetera, in our community. At that meeting, it was stated very clearly that were it not for the property tax increases, those park owners would not be passing along that increase to residents. They would have no reason to do so. But in this instance, it seems very clear that the property tax increases and the increased valuation of that property is going to have and will have a direct impact on those residents if there's not some mechanism for relief. So thanks. I just wanted to share an example from our community.
Thank you. We do have another question from Diane Meyer. Does HH Tabor surplus retention go from 1% to 10% each year or not?
No, I put into the chat the formula change that we have in front of the voters. So right now, as I mentioned, it's population plus inflation, and that's how the revenue retention formula changes on top of the Ref C formula. What would happen if HH passes is that we'd add 1% to that. So let's say population was 1% and inflation was 3%, that's 4. We'd add 1% to that. The change from that year would be 5%. So it's not like in year 2 that becomes 2% change. It's still 1% change. So that's what's in the Prop HH. It's not being additive each year. It's just 1% adder on the population plus inflation. And I showed you the graph of how that would evolve over time, and how that compares to Rep C. But that's the formula that we've put in front of voters.
Thank you, Senator. Rep Kip, you have your hand raised.
I do. I just wanted to say two things real quick. First of all, in your blue book, and I'm going to put this up, there is a QR code in your blue book that takes you to a calculator that was put together by our nonpartisan staff to tell you what your savings would be or not, right? So just want to make sure that everybody is aware that they can go to that QR code. And the other thing I just want to remind people of is back in 2022, our voters voted to reduce the income taxes, yet the Tabor refund is larger this year if HPH passes and everybody gets that one-time refund again, right? The blue book tells you you're going to get $898 back instead of that $750. I just want to let you know the Tabor formula is broken and it's not working, which is one reason that this is really going to help our state and our schools. So just wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Any last comments as we approach the 11 o'clock hour? Senator Hansen, I really want to thank you for joining us this morning and sharing information about Prop HH. I also want to thank our local elected officials, Senator Ginal, Representative Kip, and Representative Boesenecker for organizing this forum. And I want to thank all of you for joining us on this beautiful Saturday morning, and hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Beth. Have a great day, everybody.